Yep.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Faith and Finance Forum, hosted by the Catholic Finance Association and presented by Aquinas Wealth Advisors. We're delighted to have our good friend Dr. Andrew Abela with us. How are you, Dr. Abela?
I'm very well. Thank you, John.
Well, thanks for being on the show. You're the founding dean of the Busch School of Business at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. You've done a bunch of other interesting stuff that we'll get into a little bit. We really appreciate your time today, Doctor.
Pleasure.
Shall we start with a prayer? Father,
Yes.
Son, Holy Ghost, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy
Holy Mary,
Mary,
Mother
Mother
of
of
God,
God,
pray
pray
for
for
us
us
sinners
sinners,
now and
now
at
at
the
the
hour of
hour
our
of our
death.
death.
Amen.
Saint Andrew, pray for us.
Pray for us.
Father, Son, Holy Ghost, amen. Well,
Amen.
Dr. Abella, there's so much we could cover today, but I think really where we want to spend much of our time is on super habits, your new book that was recently released and is really making quite a splash. Give us the summary on super habits. What inspired you to write this great book?
So we realized when we founded the business school, we wanted it to be a school that prepared people to be successful business leaders of faith. And so we integrated into every course the principles of Catholic social doctrine, principles like solidarity and subsidiarity and so on, not just into some business ethics course, but across everything, finance, accounting, everywhere. Those principles were there. But as the years rolled by, as successful as we were, it became clear to me that it's not enough to form students to know the principles. They need to be in the habit of living those principles. Because when people get into trouble, when somebody gets sent to jail for white collar crime, it's not because they didn't know that what they were doing was wrong, right? It's because they weren't in the habit of doing the right thing. And those habits, we have a name for them. They are virtues, right? The classical idea of the virtue as habits of excellence. But when you say virtue to people, they think of it exclusively in moral terms. Whereas a habit of excellence applies to not just ethics, but effectiveness as well. So the virtues are about being an excellent human being, both in terms of doing the right thing, but also doing things in the right way and just being more successful, if you will, with as a successful human being. Um, and so I came up with the term super habits, with the idea that a virtue is a habit that, in a sense, gives you a superpower. It makes you so much more capable as a human being, so that we're more effective as well as happier and healthier each time we develop a new virtue. Hence the name super habits. And what I wanted to do is share what we're trying to form our business school students in, share it with a much broader audience, which is why I wrote the book. So.
Wow, outstanding. So it sounds like Super Habits is common to the curriculum of the Busch School at Catholic University of America, and this is an opportunity to broaden that teaching beyond the school. Is that correct?
In a sense, yes. It's the sort of thing we've been incorporating, and now we want it to be as kind of widely available as possible.
Wow, that's outstanding. Let's explore your background a little bit, Dr. Bell. You are originally from Malta, unless I'm mistaken. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And when did you come to North America?
So my family emigrated to Canada in my late teens. I went to the University of Toronto, and then after that I worked for Procter and Gamble there, and I did an MBA in Switzerland, Institute for Management Development. Returned to Canada, worked for McKinsey and Company for a number of years, and then came to the US to study theology at the John Paul II Institute and met Kathleen, my wife. We got married. I went back to McKinsey for a while, and then we came back and I did my PhD in business ethics at the University of Virginia. And then after that, worked in business a couple more years, and then eventually ended up at Catholic U, and that was 22 years ago. So
Wow, what a run. That's great. And has your faith always been a big part of your life?
I fell away from the church in my early teens, came back in my mid-20s. And I literally came back on the first day of my MBA program. I'm not sure how many people could say that, like saved by an MBA. Who knows? But I'd been searching for values and what's the meaning of life and so on, and sort of woke up in Switzerland thinking, you know what? I think my values are what I was taught from the Catholic Church. So I went to confession for the first time in I don't know how many years. And while I was in business school, I started to think about how does one live as a faithful Catholic in business?
Yes.
So I'm studying. and I got interested in ethics. And it was 1991, the year that John Paul II came out with Centesimus Annus, very providentially. So I got a copy of that and I read that. It's like, how do I square this with what I'm learning in business school? Then I went to McKinsey and I was working with McKinsey. Again, thinking, how does one grow as a faithful Catholic? So that was the proximate cause of why I came to Washington, D.C. to study theology, to try to understand church teaching about business. And I found, to my joy, that there was lots of it, but it was carefully hidden and scattered all over many different documents, which is why years later, I co-edited with Joe Capizzi the book A Catechism for Business, which you're familiar with. And that was
Yes,
an
of
attempt to
course.
collect Catholic teaching about business and economics from all the various documents of the last 100 years and more. And we used that in the founding of the Busch School. And then super habits is sort of part two. So the catechism of business was the principles, and then super habits is, okay, what are the habits to make all of this come alive?
And Dr. Abela, I think one time you told me that, like a lot of the members of the Catholic Finance Association, by the way, that your faith was stoked by going to daily mass in New York City when you're working there. Do I have that wrong? I thought you told me that one time.
You have a good memory. You have a good memory. I was working for McKinsey. Our client was a company that was headquartered in the Rockefeller Center. And being McKinsey, they put us up at the Waldorf Astoria. So I was living at the Waldorf, working at the Rockefeller Center, walking right by St. Patrick's Cathedral every morning. When a friend of mine said, well, you know about this thing called daily mass? They probably have it there at St. Patrick's. So I was only a year or two back in the faith at that point. And so I started to drop in for 7 a.m. mass there. And more often than not, it would be the great Cardinal O'Connor who'd be saying mass.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was very formative period. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome. You're a family man. You're married to Kathleen, and I believe you have 8 children. Do I have that right?
Six living with us. Two we
Yeah.
lost along the way. Yeah, but you're right, 8 in all. Six on this planet. So yeah.
And recently became a grandfather for the first time.
For the first time, and this number 2 is on the way, due in January. Yeah, so that's exciting.
Happy times. Good stuff. I love it. Well, back to your professional life. One of the things I want to get into too is founding of the Busch School, because that's a really unique thing for a leader to be involved in, starting up a, respected business school from scratch. What was that like to be there on the ground floor?
I mean, in so many ways, it was and continues to be a dream come true. So I mentioned from the moment of my reversion to the faith, one of my biggest questions was, how does one live as a faithful Catholic in business? To have the opportunity to actually found a business school exactly around that question, where we teach the answers to that question to our students, but also we have our faculty doing research, publishing books in this area, speaking in this area, coaching executives, consulting to businesses in this area. It's really powerful stuff. The excitement was short-lived, because after I was dean for 2 years, 2 and a bit years, I was plucked out of the business school to be provost of the university, which is sort of overseeing all 12 schools in the university. So for 4 years, I was watching the Busch School from a distance, dealing with issues across the university instead. But after that 4-year term was over, I was blessed to be able to come back and continue the work here. And I've been now back for about 6 years. Yeah.
How do you think the Busch School is distinctive from other Busch schools or business schools? What do you think makes your school special?
We are the only business school, to my mind, that is from the bottom up, created with this vision of how does one live as a person of faith. I don't think any other school could make that claim. Or if they were originally developed that way, they don't do it any longer. In our case, with the exception of only one faculty member, who's our oldest, longest-serving faculty member, who is a fallen away Muslim, every other faculty member is a serious faithful Catholic, the vast majority faithful Catholics, and then a small minority are evangelical Protestants. The faith really does define everything we do. And at the same time, no contradiction, our graduates go work in some of the best companies in the world and do really, really well. So what we try to do is tie the best of business education with a deep faith formation, you know. And I just don't think there's anybody else who does anything close to that. Certainly not in this country, maybe not anywhere.
What do you think the elements of the best business education are? What does that mean?
The you want to know the latest theory, but then you want it to be married to the wisdom that comes from long experience. So one of the design elements of our business school is our faculty are split 50-50 by design into PhD faculty and then former executives, former entrepreneurs, and so on. That's very rare. Most business schools, a majority are PhDs, and then you have a smaller minority, maybe of former executives, who in many cases are treated as second-class citizens. Not in our case. Everybody's sort of equal participants. And then a small number of the faculty members, myself, one of my associate deans, have sort of a foot in both of those camps where we've been business executives ourselves and we have PhDs as well. So it's a really nice combination, which allows us to bring the best of the theory with the best of the kind of wisdom that comes from long experience.
And I'm sure with a faculty of distinguished teachers and entrepreneurs like you just described, on the business side, the school is very strong. Talk to us about how you integrate the Catholic mission and the stimulation of the faith into the curriculum.
So, of course, there's all the external stuff. So we have several masses a day, we have adoration, we have special speakers and so on. That's all there, of course, it's essential. But what really makes the difference is, I mentioned before, the integration of Catholic social doctrine into all of our courses, and now our efforts to help the students grow in virtue through practice. So they're actually practicing specific virtues as part of taking their classes, so that the whole thing is all of a piece. There's no, in no sense at all is it kind of check your faith at the door. It's like faith is imbued into everything. That question of what does it mean to be a faithful Catholic flourishing in business is kind of imbues everything we do in the business school.
Wow, that's outstanding. Hey, before we get it back into super habits, I did just want to ask, I understand that one of your intellectual focuses is the study of integrity as a scientific matter. Is that correct? Would you just maybe comment on that for a second?
Yeah, I started with that early on in my career. I was doing some work on communications.
Yeah.
And I had actually a number of clients. Microsoft was among them. I used to joke that I used to travel several times a year to Redmond, Washington, to Microsoft's world headquarters to teach the makers of PowerPoint how to do presentations. And it's really key in communication to learn how to communicate with integrity.
Yes.
So how to be simultaneously effective in your communication, but also truthful, honest.
Yes.
And then you expand that idea of integrity to not just to communication, but just to business as a whole and to life as a whole. That same integration of effectiveness and ethics, is what we call virtue. So the study of integrity, in a certain sense, is the study of virtue. So I've heard people say when, if they have corporate values or even corporate virtues, they'll say integrity is one of our virtues. Well, it isn't.
Right.
Integrity is the sum total of all the virtues. It's not a virtue itself. It's the result of somebody living a virtuous life. Yeah.
All right. So back to super habits. The book is organized into chapters, which each describe in detail a super habit. Would that be an honest way to describe it?
Yes, very much so.
I'm curious, how did you refine the list? Did you find yourself struggling to limit it? Did you just walk us through the process, I guess, of identifying each super habit and dedicating a chapter to it?
How long do you have? No,
we have
just
time.
kidding.
Let's go.
No,
Yeah.
because this project took me about 7 years.
Wow.
And when I first started, I was trying to answer exactly that question. That is exactly the place to begin, because I read several really good books about the virtues by Catholic authors. And I noticed that each one of them had a substantially different list of virtues. And you think, well, what's going on here? Either this stuff is important or it isn't. And if it's important, how come everyone has a different perspective? There's got to be some order underlying this. And then my former co-editor, Joe Capizzi, recommended that I read Father Romanus Cesario's book, Virtue or the Examined Life, which is it's kind of like a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Summa Theologica on virtue. The middle part of the Summa on virtue is, like the rest of the Summa, not an easy read. And Father Cesario's book was a scholarly book, but it helps you understand kind of how that all flows together. So I read that, which took me back to the Summa to reread the whole section on the virtues. When I realized that St. Thomas, unlike the other Catholic authors who each picking and choosing their own list of virtues, actually provided a systematic treatment, a system of the virtues, showing us kind of the full set, if you will. And it is a system, it's a hierarchy where he starts with, and what he does is he makes these progressive distinctions between our supernatural and natural lives. And for our supernatural lives, of course, we have the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Then for our natural lives, he draws a distinction between our intellectual lives and what he calls our moral lives. I'll refer to as sort of practical living. And intellectual, we have the intellectual virtues. There are those. And then most of my book is focused on the practical virtues, the foremost of which are the four cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. And then Aquinas shows how each one of those four has many allied virtues. And there's a beautiful system. Not sure if you have a copy of it with you, but in the back of the book, you'll have noticed is a fold-out poster of a full-color chart that I drew to show how all of these virtues fit together. And so the beauty of Aquinas' system is he gives us a definitive answer. These are the virtues and no other. Like, this is a complete set. There's no gaps here. No one can invent a virtue that isn't in Aquinas' system. Now you can take pieces of some of the virtues and give them new names if you want, but his system is complete. So what I did was, there's 50 of them, and my original plan was to have 50 chapters, and I wrote 4 or 5 of them, and I gave them to some friends, and they're like, "Oh, we love these chapters." And I said, "Would you read 50?" And they're like, "Well, probably not." So I had to rethink the plan. And so the structure of the book instead is there are 8 virtues, and they're all virtues of self-discipline. So starting with restraint and so on, humility, etc. And then the last 4 chapters are one each for the cardinal virtues. So you have several virtues of self-discipline, then a chapter on self-discipline itself, then one on courage, one on justice, and one on practical wisdom.
Is any super habit, would you consider it like the most important one, or the the apex one, or are they all equal?
I think it depends on each person. Like, whatever's hardest for you, whatever's your weakest, is the most important one for you.
Nice.
The diagram looks like a cross-section of a tree trunk. There are these concentric rings, and so the outer ring are all the virtues. And I've remarked that it's like the bark on a tree. And if you have trees, you know that when the bark is damaged, that's when disease comes into the body, and into a tree trunk. So in the same way as a human person, there you go. If you have a weakness in any one of those virtues on the outside ring, then that's where your biggest struggle is going to be. And the best way to do it is to grow in that virtue through daily practice. So that is your audience can know comes in. There's a folded copy of that in every copy of the book. So
I'm interested in the fact that you started with developing the one you're weakest at, as opposed to maxing out the one you're strongest at. Was that an intentional choice? Would you comment on that?
Absolutely. It's so common to talk about playing to your strengths, right? But when it comes to this, is, I think, a misunderstanding that so many people have. There's our personality, right? And every one of us has a different personality, and we have personality strengths. Some are more extroverted, or some are more introverted. Some are better, more detail-oriented. Some are more big picture. This is a sort of our hard wiring, and that's how we are. If you've ever done the Clifton strengths from Gallup, it identifies there's no point in trying to change those. That's who you are. That's great. Our character is made up of our virtues, which are eminently changeable through practice. And so when we say play to your strengths, we should be thinking in terms of those things that don't change. But when we're thinking about the virtues, our biggest opportunity for growth, our highest leverage, is always to work with the weakest one. In natural terms, that's where you will get the biggest bang for your effort. In supernatural terms, your biggest weakness is always where the evil one is going to attack you. And so you need to, that's the weakest link in your defenses. You always need to turn to that and build that up.
I should note that Dr. Abela is very active on social media, particularly LinkedIn, and he's published all kinds of videos and other multimedia around the Super Habits book and the various offerings around it, which we'll get into in a second. One of the ones that caught my eye, Dean Abela, was the video about virtue signaling versus virtue. Because that one struck me very much because there's a lot of virtue signaling in today's world. There's a lot of people that are, very comfortable displaying, virtues in a way that we would consider virtue signaling, somewhat inauthentic. Why did you create that video and give us kind of the talking points around virtue signaling versus actual virtue?
So I created that video to highlight an article that I wrote for Forbes. So I write occasionally for Forbes.com. And shortly after the election, this most recent election, I wrote an article, and the title is Virtue Signaling is Dead, Long Live Virtue.
Yes.
And the substance of the article was that with the Republican sweep of the Senate, the House, and the White House, things are not looking good for ESG and DEI, right? Which is not to say that ESG and DEI are exclusively about virtue signaling, but I think you can fairly assess that a lot of it is. And I think people in that would admit that, that while there are good intentions behind those movements, there's an awful lot of, look at me, how good I am, So those things are going to have a hard slog for the next few years. So what should replace them? And what I'm arguing is what should replace them is good old-fashioned virtue. So if we're concerned about justice, then let's focus on helping people grow literally in the virtue of justice. It'll be far more effective, and it has the added benefit of actually being good for the bottom line as well, in ways that those three-letter acronyms have proven to not be the case, despite the hype, And so that was the purpose of the video, was to kind of draw attention to that article, and it's been well received. So,
Dr. Bell, I'm curious. Do you think that your super habits movement that you're a leader in, and obviously the lead advocate for, is this something new, or is this something that Western societies like the United States and other nations in the West used to teach rising generations effectively, and now it's being rediscovered? I guess what I'm getting at is this a restoration of something, or is this something truly new?
This is a restoration of virtue. This is an attempt to bring back something that was widely respected and taught in the earlier years of our country, but also in earlier civilizations like ancient Rome, ancient Greece. Some of the greatest civilizations in world history have been built on a foundation of virtue. Which is not to say that everybody was perfect, but they all understood that living a virtuous life was the way to be a great human being. What happened is we lost that, and we lost the idea that there was a particular way to be human that leads to success and happiness, and we pretend that there's 1,000 different ways. But these virtues are the result of many years, decades, centuries of discernment of what works to have a flourishing human life. What's new is that we now have a couple of decades, a bit more, of actual scientific research, principally from the field of positive psychology, studying these virtues and going, what do you know? They do work. They do make you happier. They do make you more effective, So this is not super habits is not simply a recovery of ancient tradition, as some other really good books have done. It's also uniting that tradition with modern science to say, look, and the studies prove this to be true.
If the science and our traditions so clearly point to the virtues and the super habits as being the pathway to happiness, success, all the things that people want, why do we have to fight so hard to promote them? I mean, why are they not more self-evident, I guess?
You know, I spend the whole book asking that question. It's like, what are you waiting for, people?
Yeah,
Well, partly they've been hidden in plain sight.
yeah,
Words associated with virtue have taken on different meanings, including the word virtue itself. Most people, when they hear the word virtue, including myself until I started digging into this, think of something as sort of ho-hum, goody two-shoes,
right.
They don't think of it as strength and power and success, which is what it really stands for and what it means. So that's the first thing. The second thing is they don't realize that a virtue is a habit. And so there's a lot of excitement around habits. And so I take that as a very positive indication that virtue is going to make a comeback, because all the people who are chasing after the habits literature, what they're really looking for are the virtues, because the habits literature tells you how to develop habits, but it doesn't tell you which ones. Well, the virtues are the habits that you want to develop, But also, like the word virtue, many of the virtue names, like prudence and meekness and temperance, don't mean what they used to mean. Prudence meant practical wisdom, making wise decisions. Temperance meant self-discipline. Now we think of it as in the ladies' temperance movement, like don't drink too much or at all, Meekness we think of as weakness, whereas what it means is tremendous strength, but with a gentle facade, gently and carefully done. In my book, I don't use the word meekness. I invented a word. I call it gentle firmness, because that's what it is. It's to be firm and gentle at the same time. It's the virtue, the habit for dealing with anger. It means don't blow up when you get angry, but also don't stifle your anger. Channel that anger in a firm but gentle way to do good,
Folks, we're on with Dr. Andrew Abela, Dean of the Busch School of Business at Catholic University of America, talking about his new book, Super Habits. So let's get into a couple individual super habits. We probably don't have enough time to explore all of them, but here are the ones that resonated with me, I guess. So maybe I could just ask you to drill down on a couple of them. You led with restraint. I think that was the title of chapter 1, unless I'm mistaken. Talk to us about restraint, resisting unworthy impulses. Why is restraint so important, do you think?
I put it as the first chapter because if you don't have this virtue, in a sense, nothing else matters.
Mm.
So restraint is the habit of not giving in to, as you say, unworthy impulses. So there's the twin habits. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 are restraint and humility. They're both about dealing with your desires to do things. Restraint is for desires to do silly, trivial, unworthy things, whereas humility is about the desire to do great things. And both of those desires can lead you astray if you're not careful. And so both of those virtues, both of those super habits, are our way of examining these inclinations and going, yeah, I'll do that, or no, I won't, And you know from the book that I tell a number of stories of the power of both restraint and humility, kind of both stories about when it goes wrong and stories about how to make it go right. So
humility is a big one, I think, because we live in a society where I feel like of all the super habits and the virtues, this is the one that is we have to work on the most. Our society is so prestige obsessed. People are measured by the number of like followers they have on social media and clicks. Everybody has all their titles listed out. I mean, there's just so much of a desire to self-promote. What do you think about that, Dr. Abel? I mean, like, why is it so difficult for people to capture the power of humility?
um, why is it difficult? Well, the like any other virtue, you can get torn in two different directions, right?
Yeah.
So Aquinas's definition of humility, which I use, which I really like, is basically having a right understanding of yourself and your abilities, right? And so we normally think of people failing in humility in the direction of being too proud of ourselves. We have an overinflated sense of our abilities, and that causes all kinds of problems. But there's the equal and opposite error, which is having a misunderstanding, like a insufficient understanding, inadequate understanding of our abilities, and that there isn't even a word for it. We just refer to it as false humility. Sometimes intentional, sometimes we just actually just have too poor of a sense of ourselves. Imposter syndrome is a good example of that, right? Yeah. It's like, I don't deserve to be here. No, well, take a close look at yourself and see what you're capable of, you know? I think the reason it's such a concern is we live in such a media-heavy society. So image is prized over everything else. And that can really play havoc with any sense of humility. But it's so important to stop you from falling into really dumb mistakes, things you'll regret. So restraint in particular is good for the obvious things that you regret in the short term, but humility is the kind of thing that lead you to, like a lack of humility could lead you to either ignore all opportunities for, you know, because you don't think you're up to it, or taking on things that are way beyond your ability, which is not to say you should never stretch yourself, but you shouldn't take things on that are so beyond your ability, they're just going to embarrass yourself, waste a bunch of resources, waste time, waste other people's time, you know. And yet it's not impossible to develop. Like every one of these virtues is not an immutable characteristic. They're all habits that anyone can develop. So if somebody wanted to grow in humility, for example, there are a number of exercises that I mentioned in the book, all of which are empirically validated, so scientifically validated. One of my favorites: you're about to make a difficult decision, write down a list of all the things you don't know about that topic. Very good at building humility. You know?
Yes.
Not another one, you're in a certain situation, try to take on a third-person perspective. What would an outsider say about me right now and what I'm about to do?
Yes.
Very powerful, yeah.
Well, and one thing that strikes me about you, Dr. Abela, in this conversation, other ones we've had, is, I mean, you're always like hungry for feedback. I mean, like you never get to the point where you feel like you have all the answers or you know everything about everything. I mean, you even in your discussion on writing this book, I mean, you sent chapters to colleagues, you got feedback, you know, that was a critical part of it. And in each of those interactions, you're saying, hey, I'm Dr. Abela, I'm proud of my accomplishments, I've done a lot, but I still need help. I still need feedback and people to help me get this to where I want it to be, right?
Yes, in my case, I have an insatiable curiosity, and I'm always looking for new and more interesting and more impactful things.
Yeah.
And therefore, I'm always looking at broader horizons where I don't have expertise. So I have to learn from others who do have that expertise. You know, we actually have a separate virtue for that, the virtue of teachability.
Yes.
The old word is docility, but again, that word has lost its meaning. We think it means somebody who's like a doormat, you know.
Yep.
But what docility really means is that you're a good listener, a good seeker of feedback, a person who wants to learn, who people will enjoy teaching, you know.
Yes.
So I think it's a benefit for all of us. If I could paraphrase another saying, we don't stop learning because we grow old. We grow old because we stop learning, you know? So it's never stop learning, I think.
I love it. One super habit that everybody likes to talk about is a word that none of us ever heard of until this year, eutropelia, and you can correct my pronunciation on that, which means playing well. Talk to us about eutropelia.
Eutropelia is my favorite virtue, I have to say. It is a Greek word, and you pronounce it exactly correctly. There isn't even a Latin word, let alone an English one. And what it means is this sort of joyful use of your spare time to refresh yourself, to regenerate, you know. And it's the kind of virtue that a workaholic would be missing, you know. It's finding time when you're doing something for its own sake, just for the joy of it. You know, in the book I talk about having a test of having a button, an easy button. Remember the ad from Staples, like click easy, or and then it's done. You know, if you're trying to decide whether some particular activity of yours is eutropelia or not, ask yourself, if I could get the outcome by pushing a button. So, for example, I go to the gym and I work out. Do I do that for fun, or do I do that because I want a better physique, or I want to be healthier, or because if I could get the physique and the health benefits from pushing a button, would I still go? And if the answer is no, then it's not really eutropelia. It's not saying it's a bad thing to do, but there have to be some things in your life that you do them just because. Just because I love reading fiction, or just because I love hiking, or just because I love playing the guitar. We all need that sort of thing sometimes in our week, a couple of hours a week at least, ideally a whole day, Sunday, that's what, I think it's really important in a society that keeps busy all the time. When we go out with friends to network and we exercise to be fit, and we read to improve our minds, like there has to be something that we do just for the fun of it. Otherwise, life can get miserable.
I'll combine two. I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, this straight out of St. Thomas Aquinas.
Mm.
When talking about eutropelia, he says, joy is rest for the soul.
Mm.
Makes the really important point that when our bodies are tired, all we have to do is sit down or lie down to rest. But when our minds are tired, how do you rest your mind? Even sleeping, your mind is ticking away, right? REM sleep, dreams, or whatever. The way, Aquinas points out, the way to rest your mind is to do something enjoyable.
Yes.
Because then your mind is not seeking to achieve anything. It can just relax and enjoy.
I love it. So I found gravitas and suppleness to be somewhat similar. I'm not saying they're the same thing, but I think they're kind of in the same category, at least, from my reading of it. To me, like this struck me as like, I think of the guys and the gals that like just they have that thing, they have that it factor, right? I mean, they just they come into a room and just everybody kind of turns their heads, or they just they're a particularly brilliant speaker, or they just have that stature, you know what I mean? Talk to us a little bit about gravitas and suppleness and how you can develop that while also respecting the virtues of humility what's the one about modesty? I mean, like all of this is a balance, of course, but gravitas and suppleness, you want to develop those things too.
Yeah. So these are really, really good questions, John. The two things I say. One is no virtue ever infringes on another one. As you grow in one virtue, you tend to grow in all the others. It's never the case that growing in one virtue is going to conflict with another one. And if it seems to, then one of those at least you got the wrong idea. So that's a good way to think of it. And it's a fair question to ask: are gravitas and suppleness the same thing or a different thing? Because depending on what part of the Summa you're reading, you'll get two different perspectives. Because Aquinas doesn't spend very much time on them, but he touches on them twice. In both cases, referring to ancient Roman sources, and in one case, the sources put them as one, and in other cases, they put them as two. So here's how I distinguish. They are the habits of how you moderate your own movement and posture as a human being. And gravitas is the impact that your posture has on those around you, and suppleness is the impact that your posture and movement in both cases have on you personally. So if I slouch, for example, it's bad for my body. It's bad for my shoulders, bad for my back. It also makes other people think I'm not very confident. If I sit up straight, it's better for my posture, better for my body. It also projects greater confidence. And sometimes I get the reaction, it's like, wait, these are really virtues? Like, how silly is that? It's like, no, the point is, if you're looking for an excellent life, there is no part of your life that doesn't have a scope for excellence. And movement is certainly that. And in fact, then I point to Dr. Jordan Peterson's book, The 12 Rules. Rule number 1 is stand up straight, right? With your shoulders back. So his very first rule is about, in effect, gravitas. Because then he says, you'll feel better and you'll feel more confident. Other people will conclude that you are confident, or at least he says they won't immediately conclude the opposite. So this is real stuff, and it's important stuff that we tend to forget. Anyway.
Courage is on the list, and this is one that I think anyone who thinks about virtue thinks about a lot. I've heard courage described as kind of the gateway to the other virtues, or the ones that secures the other virtues. That's probably not how we would describe it as Super Habits followers, because we know that they're all equal, and that would be giving it too much credit. But courage is important, right? Talk to us about courage a little bit, Andrew.
Very important. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said courage is the form of all the virtues at their testing point.
Yeah.
And I think what he means, the sequence of the book, I have self-discipline virtues first, then courage, then practical wisdom, then justice. And it follows roughly a sequence that Augustine gives. idea being, if you have no self-discipline, nothing matters because you just be prey for every whim, once you have self-discipline, if you don't have courage, then every obstacle is going to knock you flat on your back. Once you have both of those, then you need to be making wise decisions, so you're heading in the right direction. And then finally, justice, to make sure that everything you do is ordered to bringing justice into the world. And so that's the sequence. So I think, and so I say they're all four are equally important, but in terms of sequence of development, that's the order that I would take them in. I think it works that way.
This is a bit of a segue, but I think it's related to the super habits allied to courage, of which there are several. Jensen Huang from NVIDIA gives these talks, which I absolutely love. The title of which is "I Hope You Suffer," which is, of course, in today's society, oh my gosh, like why would you even say that, But if you actually like listen to what he's saying, I mean, it actually makes a lot of sense, I mean, it's you can't develop character, you can't develop the virtues without going through some struggle and some suffering to encounter that. I suspect that you agree with that, Andrew, but talk to us about the utility of suffering, struggle, in developing the virtues and a greater life.
Yeah, so each of the virtues is a muscle. It's a sort of a psychological muscle, you've been in a situation perhaps where you try a new sport or new exercise, and then you go, oh, muscles I didn't even know I had are aching me. The virtues for many people are muscles they didn't even know they had. And the joyful news about that is it means we already have these inside. These are not optional things that we might add in. Everybody has the courage muscle in there. And it's just a matter of exercising it. And you can exercise it in two ways. One is just deliberately looking for opportunities to exercise it daily, or in the normal course of events by how you react to everyday life. And so suffering is a great opportunity to grow in a particular virtue. Resilience, for example, is one of the virtues allied to courage, which is the habit of not letting anxiety or sorrow get in the way of what you need to do. How do we practice that? Whenever we're anxious, we try to take a step forward, and in fact, that's what cognitive behavioral therapy is all about. The best treatment for anxiety and depression in cognitive behavioral therapy is giving people the habits of moving forward despite those negative feelings. 750 years after St. Thomas Aquinas, it's basically what Aquinas said, yeah, it's if you have too easy of a life, you never get the opportunity to grow in the different virtues. Hence why being a helicopter parent is not good for your children. During orientation, when we have all of our new freshmen and their parents, I give a stern lecture to the parents about don't do this. You'll be undermining the very thing we're trying to do here, is if you try to step in and protect the kids from every little thing,
And I'm sure as the entrepreneurs and faculty members of the Busch School would agree with, it's the failures that teach you, right, Dr. Abela? The victories feel good, and they're joyful moments. You love them, but that's not really where you learn. It's the failures. It's where you struggle. You grow. Yeah,
builds
interesting.
character, as we say. So
Builds character, exactly. Judgment is one of these super habits that when I think of like the leaders that I really respect, the ones that I just have done great things in their chosen fields or for our country. Judgment comes to mind, which is another one of those kind of it factor things. It seems like the people that have it, and the ones that don't really don't. What are your comments on judgment as a super habit?
Well, it's really good to reflect on that, and I like the phrase used, the it factor.
Yeah.
It's because it's too often we can look around and assume that these are things that you either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
Whereas in every single case of the virtues, the super habits, any human being can cultivate any of the habits by practicing. Judgment would be one of the harder ones. And it's one of the virtues that make up practical wisdom, that give us the ability to make decisions. And it's specifically the habit of knowing which principle to apply in a given situation. Because sometimes they can appear to be conflicting principles. And there, I think to grow in judgment, in addition to just sort of having many opportunities to practice making difficult decisions, I think a whole bunch of reading history, particularly,
Yes.
reading about the law, reading ethical theory and so on, can give you a bunch of principles and understand how they're applied. And so that's one way education, I think, can go a long way. But then the practicing, the application of those principles is how you really grow in that virtue, like in any other virtue.
Speaking of another one, it's kind of similar, the super habit of honesty. Here's where I struggle a little bit with honesty. It's like, um, are you supposed to go through life like literally like giving voice to every thought that comes to your mind? Because if you don't, that would mean you're being dishonest. Like just talk to us about like what, if any, restrictions or like for instance, the difference between honesty and tact. You know what I mean? Like I show up at my parents-in-law's house, and mother-in-law has made a meal that I'm not particularly crazy about. Am I going to go in with guns blazing and say I can't believe you made the turkey? Like I thought we were having the ham. Like just talk to us a little bit about I guess the boundaries of honesty.
Yeah, it's a good example. Honesty doesn't mean that you owe the world every thought that crosses your
Right.
mind, It's what it does mean is that when you communicate,
Yeah.
your communication should be grounded in reality. And in fact, that's true of, I think, all of the virtues. It's making sure we have a proper engagement with reality so that you don't say that something is so when it's not so, or vice versa. But it doesn't mean you have to say everything, or disclose everything. With my students, we get into these debates about, well, what if, some Nazis at the door, you heard these. And my response to those kind of questions is, 99% of the time, that's not going to affect you.
Yeah.
So don't use that as an excuse to start, fudging the truth just because you're uncomfortable. Like there's no Nazi at the door. There's just your professor saying, "Did you do your homework?" And if you start down some path of a dog eating my home, whatever, it's like,
Yeah.
no, just tell the truth, And when somebody asks you something and you don't know, this is often where people start to stray from honesty. They don't want to just say, "I don't know." But I'll find out. It's a good place to begin practicing the virtue of honesty. It's just somebody says you don't ask you something you don't know, just say I don't know. Don't try to. Oh yeah, I think it's kind of like this and make stuff up.
Yeah. So as we get to the end of our time, I do want to explore some other things with you. Last question regarding the super habits specifically. The theological super habits is where you close the book, faith, hope, and love. Very familiar to all of us practicing Catholics, of course. Why did you place those where you did, and comment on those as super habits?
So I put them at the end because the book isn't really about them. The book is about the cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance.
Yeah.
So the theological or spiritual virtues and the intellectual virtues I put in effect in an appendix at the back of the book for completeness sake, because the wheel has all 50, so I needed to address all 50. But you could write a whole separate book on faith, hope,
Of
and
course.
in fact, I have colleagues here who are world experts on the single virtue of hope, for example. So
Yeah.
not just one book, but several books you could write on each of these virtues. So I have the appendix there for completeness sake, but that's not mainly where my book is focused.
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of the focus of the book, one of the things I think is really interesting about what you're doing, Dr. Abela, and what's distinctive about it is it's not just a book. I mean, you've created, quite a little experience around super habits with an app, I believe, and other communications that you're sending out on social media and email and perhaps other platforms. You're trying to do something with super habits more than just writing a good book. It feels like you're trying to create a movement around this. Is that accurate? And if so, describe it to us.
That's exactly right. I am hoping to provoke a restoration in virtue,
Yeah,
and I'm hoping to provoke it particularly through business. So, because if businesses start to realize how helping our employees grow in virtue is not just good for our employees, but it's also good for the bottom line. Because why wouldn't it be if your employees were more disciplined and made better decisions and were more just,
yeah,
and more courageous? And so the app is free. There's the QR code in the book, or you just go directly to superhabits.app, and it contains a diagnostic, so anybody can find out where their strengths and weaknesses are. And then it's got an AI coach where it'll give you advice on how to practice that virtue and give you regular reminders through text. So it'll be texting with you, and you can talk to it, back and forth over text. And so what we've been doing with companies is the companies will have all of their employees use the app, take the survey. We can't see the individual results. That's of course private, but we can see the aggregate results for the whole company and say, your company has in this particular area, your employees aren't very strong in X virtue. Let's work with them to try to, or here's some ways in which you can work with them to promote that virtue in your company, and then let's see what that does for the business results.
Fascinating. How many companies are participating just generally? I don't need the exact metric, but is it 100, is it 1,000? I mean, where are we at right
No,
now with
it's
that?
just a handful at this
Yeah,
point.
okay,
The app
okay,
is actually still in development. It's
okay.
usable. We have several hundred users on the app, um, close to 1,000, I think. But the next big iteration will be coming out soon. So this is all beginning. The book just came out a month ago, as you
Yeah.
know. So this is early days. But I'm excited at the response. The book sold out of its first printing in the first 3 weeks. So that was nice
Congratulations.
to see.
That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. So we're in second printing already. And I'm just very encouraged. I really think that the world will be a better place. Our companies will be better places. Our families will be better places if more people were focused on growing in virtue.
No, amen. I totally agree. And I'll just speak for myself in this. I have been to a lot of ineffective strategic planning sessions, team building sessions, development of mission statements. You know what I mean? I've been to some that are good, but I've been to a lot that are not so good. I will just speak for myself. A team conversation around super habits. Both us as individuals, me, my colleagues, my boss, et cetera, and our company as a whole with that as the starting point, that would interest me a lot more than perhaps, kind of going around the table and everybody say what their values are and putting them on the whiteboard and, writing a mission statement that everybody likes. I think that would work better. What do you think?
All the science seems to suggest that you're right.
Yeah,
That this um, that we know, for example, that habits are the surest way to drive behavior change,
yeah.
and the virtues are habits, super habits. So if we want to get behavior change among our employees, this is a very effective path for doing it.
Well, and it seems like the super habits is something that anyone can buy into, whether or not they're a practicing Catholic or not. I mean, this stuff is going to help you succeed and find happiness, whether you're going to daily mass or whether you haven't been to mass in a long time. I guess what would be your message to those in the secular world that say, "Hey, this sounds really good, but it's just a little too Catholic for me." You know what I mean? Like, what would be your thought on that, Dr. Abela?
Yeah, so the book, I wrote the book so that anybody could pick it
Right.
up and read it. I don't presuppose any religious background whatsoever because it's about being human.
Yes.
It's entirely consistent with a faith-based perspective, but it doesn't require that perspective in order to absorb it and to benefit from it.
And obviously, the super habits are found in every tradition. I mean, these come from the whole human story, every universalizing religion and just every society, right?
That's exactly right. And there have been studies on that, and across cultures, across religions, you tend to find the same super habits, virtues coming up again and again.
This is very cool. So, we're very fresh into the book launch. It just came out a few weeks ago. You're obviously pleased with initial sales and all that. What's next in your promotion of super habits? What are we going to see throughout December and going into Q1? What do we have to look forward to?
We have the audiobook coming out soon,
Good.
so which I read, so that was fun. And I say the next iteration of the app should be coming out. So the current app is only web-based, so that kind of downloadable on Android and on the iOS iPhone will be coming out next. I don't have a date for that yet, but where I'm hoping to see the growth is working with more companies to get that, trying to make it so that there'll be a sort of a self-paced, like if companies want to just get the book, go run with this, they can do that. Or if they want somebody to come and help them, that I have be able to make people available, including several of my faculty here on the Busch School, to help companies grow in this way.
Oh, I think it's so needed. I mean, the statistics that are out there about, some discouraging numbers around employee morale and just feeling fulfilled at your work and liking your job. I mean, those statistics are pretty poor. So I think that the Super Habits vision of creating a workplace that's about something deeper and something more beautiful that could really change things. And I wish you great success with that, Dr. Bell.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, as we close to the end of our time here, I just want to say thank you. Is there anything you'd like to leave with the audience before we part ways and enjoy our Thanksgiving break?
The other than the book, I think we just mentioned the Forbes articles. So
Sure.
and I have a Substack called Superhabit singular.substack.com where I do put occasional additional thoughts and on LinkedIn as well. So if we want to post those links, maybe then if people
Of
want to
course.
connect with me over LinkedIn, that would be a good way to do it. So
And I know you like LinkedIn because it tends to be the one when there's not a lot of I guess sideways energy and name calling and all that you'll see
yes,
in some other networks, which I agree with, by the way. So
yes, yeah.
well, my friend, it's so good to see you. You're in a real special moment in your life and your career, and I'm just happy to walk with you on it and share the good story about super habits. Everyone, please add Dr. Andrew Abela on LinkedIn and go to the Super Habits website, download the app, do all the stuff that he's doing around super habits. Buy the book, obviously, if you haven't already. It's available everywhere books are sold, especially Amazon and the online stuff. I flew through mine real quick, and I'm sure you will as well. So. Dr. Abela, thanks for your time today. God bless you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, John.
This has been the Faith and Finance Forum, hosted by the Catholic Finance Association, presented by Aquinas Wealth Advisors. We'll see you next time. God bless.